So this series, The Next Thing, I find it just very personal, kind of poignant. I remember when my wife and we moved to Colorado here 12 years ago. I grew up when I was a kid here, moved away. 12 years ago, we moved from California. We'd lived there for a brief amount of time. We actually moved for the first time. We moved for my wife's job. And so she was hired as the CEO of a nonprofit called MOPS International. And so we moved here. My role in California, it was obvious in God's timing, time to move on from that. I was excited about the next season, but honestly, I wasn't sure what it would be. I wasn't really stepping in immediately into my next. Maybe you know that feeling. For some of you, maybe the kids have all gone to school for the very first time. And so it's great, the kids are at school, but kind of what's my next now? Or maybe they've gone off to college for the first time and you're experiencing what we call the empty nest, or what I call the awesome season of life. But that beginning of the empty nest is a tough time. You feel kind of discombobulated. What is my role now? Maybe you're contemplating a career change or in a career change, or you've sold a business. Maybe you're new, stepping into retirement, and it's like, I think it's going to be good. But what's next? And that's what we're talking about. When I'm in those seasons of my life, when I'm wondering about the next thing, what I want is, I want turn-by-turn directions, right? I want a voice telling me, okay, turn left, turn right, make this decision, don't do that, and I'll get to where I'm going. But instead of turn-by-turn directions, I kind of get something that looks like this. Does anybody recognize that? That's the map of the London Underground, okay? The subway system in London. If you've ever been to London, you know that eventually this map's very helpful, but when you first see it, it's just of no help whatsoever. Because first thing you have to do is figure out, where am I on that map? And then you have to figure out, where is it I want to go? And then what color lines connect me there? It's good to have the map, but what you really need is you need a guide, right? That'll help you read the map. And so it's great when my wife and we get a chance to go to London once in a while and to have a local go, oh, okay, no, you want to catch the Central line to the Piccadilly station, change to the Piccadilly line, and that'll take you where you want to go. Okay, thank you. That is incredibly helpful. Well, that's what God promises us. When we're looking for the next thing, he says, I'll provide basically a map as well as a guide. It says in Proverbs, this is one of the anchor verses of this series. In Proverbs chapter 3, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. He will show you the map and show you how to go forward on the map. In fact, I was reading this week in my devotions in Psalms, and there's a verse that says, for that's what God is like. He's our God forever and ever, and he will guide us until we die. And so God says, when you're looking for the next thing, just know that there's a map and there's a guide, but there's some other things that we need to know about that. And that's what we've been talking about in this series. Scotty told us this. He said that we can all know that God loves us, loves me, and has a wonderful plan for my life. That's incredibly helpful for me when I'm in a kind of a stuck place or a lost place, to know God has a plan. It's a great plan. I just have to figure out what the next step is in that plan. Also, God sees the big picture. See, God's writing a great big story, and he invites each of us into that story. He knows the beginning and the end of the story. And so even though I don't see the whole picture, God does. And not only that, God is in my future. Like, he already knows where it's headed. That's incredibly comforting to me, that he's not scared. He's not worried. He's not wondering, oh man, I wonder what will happen next. And then, as I said, God also promises that he'll be my guide. And so as we're looking at the next step, those foundational principles are helpful. Last week, Scotty, and if I love all of Scotty's messages, last week was a keystone message. And I really recommend, especially if you're in this time of what's next, to go back and listen. And Scotty told us 3 or 4 things that the next thing requires. He said, first, the next thing requires faith. We have to just have faith. Sometimes we don't know for sure, and we have to step out in faith. He said the next thing requires sacrifice. Sometimes we have to let go of something that's good to move to something that's great that God is offering us. And so we have to sacrifice some things when we're stepping into the next thing. And then he said the next thing requires courage. In fact, Scotty ended the message by saying, you may be just one brave decision away from a better future, because it requires courage. Well, what we're going to do today for the rest of our time is we're just going to pick up there with where Scotty left off at the end of that message, because I think there's one more thing that the next thing requires. The next thing requires community. It requires community. Why would I say that? Why? I mean, I'm trying to make this decision on my own. Well, let me give you a couple things that I think kind of show us that we all need community. First thing is we were all created for community. Like, we're not lone rangers. We're not individuals doing it on our own. God created within each one of us. The psalmist said, when we were knit together in our mother's womb, there was this need, this desire for community. You see it all the time in every area of life. Now, if you're a golf fan, this is the best week of the year. And if you're a golf fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And for the rest of you, you have no idea. But this week, the BMW Classic is going to be played right here in Castle Pines. And I would explain what the BMW Classic is, but it would take the rest of the day. Just trust me, big tournament. And I'm excited. I have my tickets for Friday, and I'm going to, for the first time, see my favorite golfer in person, a guy named Scotty Scheffler. Scotty is the #1 golfer in the world right now. And if you know anything at all about golf, it seems like a very individual sport, doesn't it? It's just the golfer, his club, the ball, and the hole. That's all there is to it. But Scotty actually has a swing coach, he has a putting coach, he has a trainer, he has a caddy on the course with him, he has a manager. Scotty has an entire team around him all the time. So no matter what he does, when he wins, they win as a team. Well, that's just kind of a representation of how God created all of us, is we are created for community. Look what the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 12. He said, just as our bodies have many parts and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body, and look at this, we all belong to each other. We all belong to a community. We see this throughout the Bible. Like in the beginning, okay, Genesis, God creates man, then he looks at man and he goes, this is not good. Like, yeah, that's not exactly what he said. He could have, but what he really said is, he said it's not good for man to be alone. And so he created Eve. Why? Because Adam needed community. Eve needed community. He put them together. When Moses was going to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, Moses said to God, I need a team. I need somebody to go with me. And God said, okay, we'll bring your brother Aaron with you. He went as a team. When Jesus came and started his ministry on earth, one of the very first things he did is he picked a community. He picked a team. We'll talk a little more about that in a few moments. But the point is, each one of us was created to live in community, to have a team around us. That's why the next thing requires community. The community, we're all created for community. There's power in community. There's power in community. I'll mention this again, but when people gather on purpose, for a purpose, there is power in that. Look at this verse from Philippians. It says, is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? I want to point something out here. The writer Paul, he's using hyperbole here. Like, he's saying, if being around Jesus has helped you at all in any way, in any little tiny thing in your life, it's almost sarcasm. Those of us who have the spiritual gift of sarcasm see it as sarcasm. But he's using hyperbole, saying, if you've gotten anything from God, do me a favor. He goes on and he says, then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Paul is saying when you agree together, when you love each other, when you work together, there's power in that, okay? We see power when we are in a community, because we need a community to cheer us on. We need a community to cheer us on. I don't know if you watch the Olympics. I love the Olympics. Every 4 years, I love watching the Summer Olympics. I love track and field. When you watch track and field, they run a race. Whoever wins the race, the first thing they do is what? They run over to the stands and they find their mom, right? They hug their mom, and mom's crying and they're crying. It's such a cool moment. But then TV flashes to their home community. And in their community, they're gathered together in a room somewhere, and everybody is jumping up and screaming and high-fiving and hugging. Why is that? Because they're celebrating together. They're cheering this member of their community on, and there's such power in that, in knowing that you have a team that's cheering for you. One of the things I love about being on staff here at Journey is our team cheers for each other. Some of the staff knew I was going to speak this weekend, so last night I was getting texts from different staff members praying for you, dude. You got this, man. I walk in today, I'm getting fist bumps, I'm getting hugs, I'm getting texts during the services going, hey, I'm praying for you. I love that. Sometimes life can be tough, right? Life, it can be hard. We need a community that's going, you got this. We are here. We got your back. We need a community. There's power in a community that cheers us on. We also need a community to pull us back in. Remember the first time I ever went on a raft trip, my wife and I were new to a community, and some friends said, hey, our community group's going to go on a raft trip. Do you want to go? Well, I spent my teen years in Missouri, and we went in Missouri on what are called float trips. Anybody ever been on a float trip? Float trip is when you get an inner tube, which is something that they used to put in tires. Don't worry about that. You get an inner tube, and then you get another inner tube. And the other inner tube, you put your cooler in, and then you lay on this inner tube, and you float on the river. And once in a while, you'll just flap your hands a little bit, and for about 4 hours, you just float. I thought that's where we were headed, right? So I show up to the raft trip. I've got my little cooler with me, and they said, I don't think you're going to need that. And I'm like, why? So why don't you go in that little hut? I think you'll understand better. So go in the little hut. They hand me a life jacket and a helmet. What is that for? And then they make me watch a 20-minute video on the 38 ways I'm going to die on that river. And I'm like, this is a bad idea. And we get in the boat, and they start talking about class 3, class 4, class 5, rapids. I didn't understand any of that. All I know is when we turned the corner, we were in a class infinity rapid. Like, it was crazy. Before you know it, our raft, I think they call it breached, it's stuck up on a rock. The river is coming in the raft. I'm on the bottom side. I know I'm going to get swept out in the river. I saw the video. I'm dying. Like, it's certain death for me. Which all of a sudden, a friend reaches across the raft, grabs me by the belt, he pulls me back in. We all need that sometimes. Life feels like that sometimes. It feels like the river is coming in the raft. It feels like we're drowning, like we don't know which way to turn, and we need a community of people who will reach out and say, I gotcha. Doesn't matter. Call me at 2 a.m. They text you the next morning and say, are you good? We need that community, the power of community, to pull us back in. We also need community to light the way home. To light the way home. I don't know why all of my stories involve water and me almost dying, but that's just, I think it's God's way of saying, stay off the water, Geoff. So we moved from Houston, Texas to Charleston, South Carolina, right on the coast. And when we moved there a few years in, we bought a little fishing boat, a little 18-foot fishing boat. And I thought, after we bought the boat, you know what'll be fun? We will take the whole family out on the boat on the Wando River, huge river, and they shoot fireworks off the bridge over the Wando, and we'll go watch the fireworks from the water. It'll be a blast. And it was. We had a picnic, and it was me and my wife, my son, my pregnant daughter-in-law, and our daughter. And we had so much fun. We ate and had fun, and then the sun went down, beautiful sunset. They fired the fireworks off the bridge. And then when the fireworks were over, it was pitch black. There was no moon, no stars. I don't know if you've ever been out on the water when it's dark, but it is the blackest black you can imagine. And I've got to get our boat back to our dock about 3 miles up the river. And it's at that moment I realized I don't have a GPS, I don't have a depth finder, and I don't have a spotlight. I'm an idiot, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness. Now, rivers, coastal rivers, there's no channel down the middle of them. The channel goes all over the place. And you have to stay in the channel or you'll hit something. You can ground the boat or you can hit it and you can hurt people. People die doing that. And I've got to find that channel in the pitch black with other boats zipping past me in every direction. And we're in a bad place. I don't know what to do. I'm scared to death. And then I look up and I see an outline of a boat quite a ways ahead of us. And all of a sudden they shine a spotlight on a channel marker. So I point the boat toward that channel marker. And as I get close, they move on and they put a spot on the next channel marker. So I go that way. All the way up the river, marker after marker, they light the way back to the dock and back home. And there are times in life when we just need a community that'll light our way home. I have a friend whose daughter is just a young adult, and she's in the dark right now. She grew up in church, she grew up knowing Jesus, but she's making bad decisions, and she's headed in the wrong direction. And my prayer, she doesn't need another sermon. She could preach the sermons better than the preacher can. She doesn't need another Bible study. What she needs is a community that will just light the first marker that leads her back home. We all know what that's like. We need that kind of community. So we were made for community. There's power in community, but here's the thing. We have to find our community. You don't just stumble into community. Showing up at church is great, but you don't just walk in the doors and then there's community. You have to be intentional about finding your people, finding your community. Here's how most of us find our community is we look for people who like what we like, who hate what we hate, and make us comfortable. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what we look for. Like my wife and I were on vacation this summer, and I was in the hotel pool, and I had my little raft there, and I'm just kind of floating around the pool. And I see a guy across the pool, and he's wearing a hat, and it's got a Broncos insignia. So I paddle over there, and I go, Broncos. And he goes, Broncos, and I go, Broncos. And we're best friends now. Like, that's all we needed. Community. The next day, I'm in the same pool, different guy, wearing a hat. It's got a silver star on it. I don't need to talk to him. We are not going to relate to each other. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be around people who are similar to you, but there's more to community than just that. In fact, Jesus intentionally found his community with people he chose to love. Not just the easy to love, not just the people who liked what he liked, but people that he intentionally chose to love. Take a look at how Jesus found his community. One day, soon afterwards, Jesus went up on a mountain to pray, and he prayed to God all night. Now, when you're reading the scripture, nothing's in there by chance, by accident. It's important to note that Jesus thought community was so important that before he selected his community, he spent all night up praying, asking for guidance. And then it says, at daybreak, he called together all of his disciples. He had a lot of people around him. He called them all together, and he chose 12 of them to be apostles. Now, the list that we're going to read in just a minute to us is kind of innocuous, but to first century Jews, they would see that this was a very, very strange list of people to be in one community together. Let's take a look at that list. Here are their names. Simon, who he named Peter, Andrew, Peter's brother, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew. So we're familiar with Peter. Peter's a fisherman. He's kind of a small business owner. Some of the other guys work with him in the small business. They're all kind of blue-collar workers. That makes sense. Jesus grew up in a blue-collar home, a woodworking kind of construction job home, and these guys are fishermen. They work with their hands. So that all makes sense. Jesus invites these guys in. But then it gets weird. Now he invites this guy Matthew in. And we know from other places in Scripture that Matthew is a tax collector. The best illustration I would give is think of Matthew as a crooked IRS agent, okay? And these small business owners, these blue-collar workers, Matthew, every year, he audits their taxes no matter what. No matter how careful they are, he runs an audit on them. Every year he says, oh, you owe more here. You didn't pay enough there. And then in addition to that, he takes about 10% of that money and he pockets it. And they know he's doing it. They know he's crooked. And just to add insult to injury, he works for the Romans. He works for the country that conquered their country. This would be like a crooked IRS agent in America that works for the Russians who have conquered us. Like, this is nuts. And Jesus said, it'll be fun. Let's have Matthew hang out with us. That'll be cool. But then he goes on and he says, he brings in Thomas. Thomas is the guy that can find the dark cloud behind every silver lining. He's just that guy that brings everything down. You got James, the son of Alphaeus. Then you have Simon, who is called the Zealot. A zealot is basically a domestic terrorist, okay? So what Simon was, is he was a guy that would kill people if he thought it could help start a riot that could overthrow the Roman government. So you've got these guys who are just working to make a living, got a small business, want people to just leave them alone. You got this crooked tax agent who's working for the foreign government. And now you got the guy who's trying to overthrow that foreign government. And Jesus said, let's hang out. This will be great. And then we go on. We got Judas, son of James. And then we have Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed him. Judas is a liar. He's a thief. He betrays Jesus. All the guys know that Judas is just, he's a scummy kind of guy. And Jesus chooses these 12 guys. And we know culturally, there's three things we know that probably they all do agree on. First of all, because of their culture, they probably all have a disdain for women. Religiously, they probably all look down on people who have been divorced. And they definitely all hated people from Samaria. They hated Samaritans. Jesus said, guys, let's go on a trip. Let's go to Samaria. There's a divorced woman there you ought to meet, right? Imagine the conversations around the campfire at night, like when they start talking about politics, or they start talking about religion, or the economy. I bet it gets pretty heated, right? Kind of like what our conversations over the next 2 months might be like here in America as we lead up to this election. Like, it gets hard. But Jesus intentionally chooses these guys and puts them together, steps into the tension. And he says, guys, we're together on purpose for a purpose. And if you want to fulfill your purpose, you got to stay. You got to say, I'm in. I'm not going anywhere. And 11 of the guys stay, and those 11 guys change their world. I think there's something there to that intentional community that we choose, that we commit to, and then we say, I'm going to love you regardless. One more thing I want to say about community is this. I believe we're called to this community, to this specific community. Paul says in his letter to the Corinthians that our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where he wants it. See, gang, I don't think it's an accident that you live in Castle Pines or in Castle Rock or in Parker or Highlands Ranch, Aurora, Centennial, whichever one of those communities you might live in or another one. I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's an accident that you live in the house or apartment on the street that you live on. I think God has placed you in that community. I would go further. I don't think it's an accident that you're in this church. I believe that we are called to this church. Now, some of you are just checking Journey out. You're new. We're not a cult. You can leave anytime you want to. But for a lot of us, we've been here a while. And I think what Jesus and what God is saying to us is, guys, gang, I want you called in that community. Like, you may have political differences. You may get offended by something someone says or does. You may not connect with everything that goes on in a service. But I think God is saying, but are you going to commit to that church, to that community? Because there's power in that. In his letter to the Thessalonians, Paul explains how this can work. Brothers and sisters, we urge you to warn those who are lazy, encourage those who are timid, take tender care of those who are weak, be patient with everyone. Paul doesn't say, hey, if you get irritated, just move on. If someone just doesn't do what they're supposed to do, just push them out. Paul says, just commit to each other, have honest conversations, be clear, be kind, but hang in there together. Because here's what I believe about the next thing. I believe that the next thing requires committing to a community of people I choose to love. Saw the power of this. I told you that my wife and I, after about 14 years of marriage, we moved from Houston to Charleston, and we hardly knew anyone. And it was a rough time in our marriage. We got married at 19 and 20. I was very, very immature. I just wasn't smart about how I treated my wife and how we made decisions, and it had frayed our relationship. And then we moved halfway across the country, and we were in a tough spot. We went to church, and we didn't really know very many people. And leaving church one day, a lady said to my wife, "Would you like to come over to our house Friday night for small group?" Now, I'm an introvert. So my thought was, I don't know what a small group is, but going to a stranger's house, let's choose no. Let's not do that. And my wife says, "Sure, we would love to. We'll be there." Wonderful. But guys, I got to tell you, we went that Friday night, and it was worse than I expected. It was terrible. They did everything we don't do in Journey small groups. Like at one point, we sit in a circle and we sing. And let me tell you, dudes do not want to sing to each other. That is not a thing we do, right, voluntarily, unless it's the Star-Spangled Banner and there's a ball game coming, right? And then the leader of the group pulls out his Bible and he preaches at us for 20 minutes. And I'm thinking, this is my Friday night, singing Kumbaya and getting preached at, but it gets better. Then they say, "Why don't everybody grab the hand of someone next to you?" No! And we'll just pray together. I'm like, oh my, it was awful. All I could think of is, get me out of here. We're never coming back. We're walking out the door. The lady who invites us says, "Oh, we'd love to see you back next week." And I'm thinking, unless hell freezes over, it's not happening. When I hear the voice of my beautiful little wife saying, "We'd love to. What can we bring?" No! So the next Friday night, we go back. And I got to tell you, it was worse. Like, it was terrible. And we went back the next Friday night. And it didn't get better. But we started to love those other people in that room. We came from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of things. And over the weeks and months that followed, those became our best friends. And they helped pull us back into the boat. And they helped show us the way back home. And I don't know that I'm on this stage today. And I don't know that I'm still married for 42 years to the love of my life if it's not for that group of people that we just chose to love each other. And we just stuck in it with each other. The next step in your life, you need that community. And that's what today is about. That's my prayer. Would you pray with me? Father, it says in Psalms that you set the lonely in families. And Lord, for some of us, that's true. Whether our natural family or family we've just been a part of, we have this amazing community. But for many of us, we don't. Lord, I pray that you'll lead us to choose that community. Lord, I pray for someone who might be here who would say, I'm not even sure what we're talking about here. I don't follow Jesus, or maybe I used to, but I'm that one that's out in the dark. I want to come home. Lord, I pray you'll shine your light into their life. Maybe you want to pray a prayer kind of like this with me. Jesus, I want to follow you. I want to follow you home. Lord, I know my past behind me it's not good. But I want to put that behind. And today, whatever it means, I'm going to follow you with my life. And Lord, I pray for each of us that we will follow you and follow you into community. Lord, we ask it in your name. Amen.